And so I have team members in 9 countries across 5 continents. But crucially, we make sure that just because we are remote, it doesn't feel it. It's reviewing the data. It's looking at what is going well and not so well, crucially, and therefore what are the biggest bottlenecks that are stopping us from getting from where we are now to where we need to be. Talking about things like business leaders who are working all hours, evenings, weekends, and feel unable to work on the business and instead stuck in it. They feel unable to spend decent amounts of time with their family members. They might be stressed, they might be unable to go on holiday, or at least unable to go on holiday without constant disruption.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. Joining us on Data Malarkey today is serial entrepreneur, business simplifier and podcaster Alexis Kingsbury. Alexis is the co-founder of AirManual, a company that helps businesses document their processes, onboarding and training so that employees can take on new responsibilities and deliver high-quality work more quickly and more efficiently. Indeed, on Alexis's LinkedIn profile, he says that he saves thousands of hours of time for business leaders each year, reducing stress, we'll come back to that in the title of his podcast, and unlocking business growth. He's been business savvy since before he was even a teenager, and founded his first business while studying management science at university. From my using data smarter mindset and perspective, making better business-focused use of data is precisely what Alexis does to empower all sorts of organizations to grow faster, with less pain for sure, while at the same time avoiding the common mistakes that everyone seems to make. Alexis, welcome to Data Malarkey.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Sam. It's great to be here.
Well, now tell me, I trust that was a decentish summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Anything that I've got wrong?
I mean, honestly, I'd like the recording so I can transcribe it and put it on my LinkedIn profile. That's pretty strong. No, I think that's pretty solid. I think you're probably right that, my first registered business probably was while I was at university, and you're exactly right that I was doing essentially businesses back from when I was 11, 12 years old. It's just that they were washing cars and selling newsletters and creating PlayStation websites with banner advertising that provided some checks of a few dollars here and there for what I was earning. So I've kind of gone on to different businesses since then. Now have 2 software businesses, Spider Gap and AirManual, and a consulting practice. But your introduction was spot on.
Very good. I remember mowing lawns and washing cars. Domestically, this dates me and ages me and makes me clearly the older person on this. Just there's no seniority. It's just that I'm old. My dad used to pay me in Smurfs for washing the car and mowing the lawn, because National Garages, long departed from the UK shores, used to give out about 2 Smurfs for a full tank. It was a good deal from my dad's point of view.
So the good news is that Smurfs have come back, so don't worry, it doesn't age you at all. I don't think they work as currency in petrol stations anymore.
No, I lent, this is, I wasn't expecting to go here. I lent my collection of about 300 Smurfs to my sister when my nephew, who's now well into his 30s, was born. They were mysteriously all lost. But that is another story.
Oh dear.
Right, listen, before we talk about data, I want to go beyond the day job, and I want to ask you an opening question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, Alexis. Can you tell me, how do you spend your time?
Oh, it's interesting you say can I is an interesting question, because it's I'm not sure I can all the time. I think that the nature of my role has changed so much. To some extent, as an entrepreneur, my job is to work out what works, do new things all the time, and then pick out the things that do work and get them repeated without me, so that I can then do more of the first activity of finding what else works. So how I spend my time over the years has been very varied. Right now, a lot of my time is spent speaking at events, speaking on podcasts, doing our own podcast. But then, I suppose I talk about those things as being almost a role I play within my organizations. In theory, that is something I could employ someone to do in future, perhaps a chief marketing officer that wants to do those activities. So in terms of what do I do in my businesses at the moment, that's the majority of it. But most of my time is working on the business. And to some extent, if I was to make it a bit more aligned to how you might look at it, it's reviewing the data. It's looking at what is going well and not so well, crucially. And therefore, what are the biggest bottlenecks that are stopping us from getting from where we are now to where we need to be? And then working out either what do I need to test, do I need to do to find out what the answer might be, or allocating resource from within the team to make that happen, whether it's that they need to go do the research or to implement the new thing or to do a particular activity. And so to some extent, that's how I spend my time, is problem solving, troubleshooting, reviewing what's working and what's not.
Now, when we first met earlier this year, I was struck by the real straightforwardness, down-to-earthness, no-nonsenseness of your approach. And I mean, I don't think you being self-effacing about it, but the relatively straightforward things that you have your clients do to systemize the way that they're operating and make sure they do them quicker and more efficiently. And yet, despite that simpleness and straightforwardness, or maybe because of that simpleness and straightforwardness, the transformational impact that can have for your clients, your promise, not only your promise, your delivered promise of saving 15 hours a week for leaders in small businesses. Can you tell us, of course it will be in really simple terms, what it is that AirManual in particular does for its clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think your assessment there is fair. I think in terms of the impact that we have, if I kind of start there and then work back to the, as you say, the straightforward thing that we do, I think in terms of the impact, and that's something close to my heart, because our number one core value across all of my businesses is focus on impact. We always start with the end in mind and work out what are we actually doing. In terms of the impact that we have with our clients, you're talking about things like business leaders who are working all hours, evenings, weekends, and feel unable to work on the business and instead stuck in it. They feel unable to spend decent amounts of time with their family members. They might be stressed. They might be unable to go on holiday, or at least unable to go on holiday without constant disruption. And in some cases, we have business owners who fundamentally have said to us that if we hadn't been involved, either they or their business wouldn't have survived, because they go through tough times, and they were already stressed, and without having reduced the stress and free up their time, then they wouldn't have been able to cope in those times. So that always it brings a bit of a lump to my throat, because that at its core, that's one of the things I love most about what we do, is to really help business leaders. And they might be the owner, it might be a COO, it might be a head of sales or whatever, who fundamentally feel so stressed and relied upon that they're not able to do the very basic things that we would encourage, never mind allow, of our employees. I was at a mastermind a few weeks ago where I asked the question, out of interest, how many business owners in this room full of business owners, track their own holiday? How many days holiday they take? And the answer is no. And not only, I think it was 1 out of a room of 40 people. And I think, and my hand was up because I do track mine. And it was almost met with a kind of it's even surprising to be asked that question. But the reason that they're not tracking it is because they know it's so low, right? It's like, and of course, with employees, why do we track it? Well, either it's to make sure that they don't overtake, but often in my business particularly, it's to make sure that they're not undertaking holiday. We want to encourage them, making sure in our businesses we allow 40 days holiday. And so we want to encourage that. We want them to make sure that they're rested and so on, because we know that otherwise they can burn out and they can start to question, would I be happy at another company? I don't want them thinking about that. I want them taking the holiday. I want them to have 3 weeks off and not get disrupted. And so I love the fact that we make that transformation for people. But on the other side, there are businesses where it's less about getting them out of that kind of pain and more about removing the bottlenecks to growth. And so whether it's that you've got key people that the business is dependent on, and so it can't train up other people. So for example, For smaller businesses, you might have a business owner who does all the sales, and they can't grow until they are able to train other salespeople up. Or in larger businesses, maybe it's a business where they're just having to firefight so many issues and mistakes that as a result, they're not able to focus on growth because they would just be scaling a problem. And so those are some of the sorts of things that we solve. Like in a nutshell, to some extent, it's scaling without stress. That's, which we do a newsletter on at scalingwithoutstress.com for that reason, right? It's all about how do you do that. So that's kind of the lofty ambition, but something that we actually achieve. And I'll happily then go into how do we actually do that. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, I'm sure I don't know if you'd phrase it in this way. I always think about the importance of life-work balance rather than work-life balance. I think putting work before work-life. It's it's like the French and Italians eating to live, living to eat, rather than the British eating to live. And I'm super impressed with your 40 days holiday. I think for your own, but I mean, clearly you've seen the benefits of this. And I was impressed. I think it was in a talk at an event I saw you talk at. You were talking about, I don't know if it was last summer or summer before, but taking a really protracted holiday, and you had entire confidence. Not only did you have entire confidence, confidence was justified because when you came back, there'd been some contracts that had been landed that you had no idea about before you went on holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was, as a point of recording, last summer. It was a 6-week road trip across France and Spain with my wife and 2 kids. And yeah, it was absolutely incredible. And the team were able to cope. In fact, one of my team members was kind of reminiscing about it because she'd shared the story with a client just today, where it's like, yeah, like they were able to just carry on and do their things. And particularly on my other software business, as you say, there were brand new clients, major clients, companies like Volvo and so on, where the first I saw of it is when I got back from holiday and happened to be in the bank account and I seen the transactions and see the money come in. Like, I love that. I love the fact that that's where we've got that business to, so that it's able to grow. And in fact, that business is a nice example where it grew 20% year on year over a period where myself and my co-founder are completely out of the business day to day, even strategically now, because I used to say I'm only involved really in the strategy setting. Now I've got to a point where that executive team set their own objectives in line with our 10-year target and 3-year goals and so on. And so I essentially review that and provide a bit of coaching essentially. And increasingly, I'm not sure I add much. So, but that's the dream, right? Getting the business to that point that it doesn't require me on that. And an AirManual, by comparison, is newer, and so I am required strategically and on some more of the day to day, including essentially evangelizing and speaking at events and so on. But certainly day to day sales, consulting, setting up subscriptions, all the providing support, all those things happen successfully without me being available, which means not only am I able to take the holiday, but I don't get disturbed on it. In fact, we, across the company, we essentially have a code word that we use if you do need to disrupt a holiday. And I remember when we first started doing that, it happened every so often. So my co-founder would go off for 3 weeks and maybe he got a couple of these code word messages, which meant that maybe twice over the course of 3 weeks, he had to log on and fix a problem because only he had login access or whatever. But on that 6-week trip and on the 4-week holiday that my co-founder took during that same period, which is important, it overlapped, that didn't happen at all. So yeah, it was awesome that we're able to do that and be able to ignore everything, knowing that the rest of the team will highlight if there's anything. It means that you don't have to sit on the Slack channel or keep on top of your emails. There's I know that I'll get a text message with this code word if I need to see it.
I used to work with a brilliant guy, a guy called Mike Greenlees. He was one of the G's in Gold Greenlees Trot advertising. One of the London madmen of the 70s and 80s. Fantastic guy. He was running another business, kind of in his retirement, but running it very, very effectively. And his approach on coming back, he didn't look at email ever, but when he went on holiday, when he came back from holiday, he would go and do his email, do Control A to highlight everything, hit delete, and then go into deleted items and delete. And I remember one of his senior executives seeing him do that one day when he came back from work. Said, "Well, why do you do that?" He said, "Well, if you've solved the problem, then I don't need to know about it. And if you haven't, I'll have a meeting about it this afternoon. So I don't really see the point of doing it." The psychologist in me also hearing about your, undertaking of holiday or wanting to discourage undertaking of holiday. The psychologist in me, we kind of aware of both carrots and sticks. I always, I've not been in the position to ever enforce this, or I've not tried to enforce this, but the psychologist in me would like to fine employees a day's salary for every day's holiday they don't take. I think that but there are carrots and sticks, because I think it's so important that holiday is taken entirely as you say. What is really interesting and refreshing to hear from the businesses that you lead is that you appear not to suffer from cobbler's children's shoes syndrome. You appear to be able to apply your own principles and rules to your own businesses. Let's think a little bit about the way that you work with data. Can you tell me how, maybe particularly in AirManual, what role data plays in, if not your day-to-day work, then your company's day-to-day work?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say that I guess the core place when I think of data in our business, there's a few places that come up. So the core one that immediately springs to mind is we have our exec dashboard, which is essentially a Google spreadsheet which pulls in or has manually entered on a weekly basis all of the key metrics that we feel as leaders we need to be able to see to get a pulse on what's going on and be able to delve in where needed, so that I can essentially see, are we getting the revenue in that we expected? If not, is that new customer or existing customers? If it's new, is that because we're not converting the sales conversations we're having, or is it because we're not having enough sales conversations? Is that because the show up rate to those calls is too low, or because we're not having enough arranged? If we're not having enough arranged, is that because we're not getting enough qualified sales qualified leads, or is it that we're not getting enough leads at the top of the funnel? And is that because of being able to see that and see that at a glance is crucial for us to then on a fortnightly basis review as an exec team and say, what's going on in this business? What should I care about? What do I need to worry about? And we have that across a variety of areas, essentially every function in the business through IT, HR, finance, etc. So, for example, we have a weekly employee happiness survey that means that I can identify if I have an issue with team happiness. And to date, normally it's been related to sickness, which in itself is interesting and useful. Sometimes it's very rarely and occasionally it's not, and that allows us to then look into, okay, why is that and what needs to happen? So that's the first thing that comes to mind, and the crucial part of that is having those KPIs, having it all always up to date, and then having meeting rhythm that means that we review it. And in terms of how do we have a checklist in our AirManual software which provides us with the agenda that we go through in every exec meeting, so that we're clear on, okay, we start the meeting with review of wins. So everyone shares some wins. Okay, next is review our progress, our KPIs against our targets. Okay, and that's and we've got 5 minutes for that, and then 5 minutes for reviewing our process dashboard to identify any processes, etc., that have overdue or got issues. And this, by the way, is a standard structure that we have across all of our teams. So finance has their team meeting, sales has theirs, and so on. And essentially, it follows a similar structure, reviewing against our progress against our objectives and key results. We're doing a retrospective on what could have gone better, or what's working well, and then spending a significant amount of time tackling issues. And those issues are often as a result of reviewing the data to see, okay, where are we at and where are our concerns, dropping that down to an issue and tackling it. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. We also have a daily huddle where our 6 most important metrics are reviewed by the entire team as part of a 10-minute daily huddle. Now, it's probably worth highlighting at this point, we are a globally distributed remote team across all of my companies. That's always the case. And so I have team members in 9 countries across 5 continents. But crucially, we make sure that just because we are remote, it doesn't feel it. And so one of many ways in which we help with that is by having our daily huddle. That means that even if only for 10 minutes, like hypothetically, let's say that the way that your diary lined up just meant that the rest of your team wasn't in, like your sales team, engineering team, whatever. And so, and maybe you don't even know, like maybe you're an engineer and haven't even got any other calls arranged. That means you could plausibly have a day without seeing anyone because you work from home and you live alone and so on, except that you've got the daily huddle. So at least the very, very minimum, you'll have 10 minutes with everyone else in the company where you'll see them and you'll be asked to share a win, personal or professional. Share a win. You'll see the KPIs. You'll see our progress against key results. There'll be a highlight of any issues or blockers that have come up. And then there's normally something funny or interesting at the end for us or to be sent off on our way. And that's 10 minutes. And that's sufficient to not only create connection, but also give everyone visibility of the data. There's no one in the business that could say, oh, I don't know how we're doing in terms of our revenue or our number of calls with customers or customer satisfaction responses. Like all of those things are shown on charts cumulatively against our cumulative target. So you can see whether, did we start off the quarter a bit below, but now we've caught up, or did we start above and now it's flatlined? Like everyone can see that. There's no hiding, and it means that you've got absolute clarity across the team on how to do it. So those are the two big ways that immediately come up for me in terms of how we're using data. But then, of course, you can go deep into every other function of the business, how we use it in marketing, how we use it in sales, and so on very specific areas.
Are there any particular challenges that you face in making sure that the data is useful for you? I mean, often this is in terms of cleanliness or it being intact or it being usable. But I mean, from the way you describe those key metrics and the way that they're updated daily and discussed daily and also at a weekly cadence as well, are there any challenges that you face?
Yes. So I'd say it depends a bit on the data. So some data tends to just be quite clean and easy, right? So there are exceptions to everything, but let's say, to keep it simple, some of the financial information is relatively clear cut. If you're talking about what was your revenue, and of course, is it accrual basis, is it cash basis, and all these sorts of things. But generally, that's pretty easy to do, and is relatively automated as a result. There are then other parts of the business. For example, marketing data is traditionally a real challenge where there are so many things that can go wrong with that. And so you try your best, you have automation, but then you need manual processes around the edges to clean stuff up. So for example, we might suddenly find that, fantastic, we've had a massive spike in our leads last week. And then you go into the data and find that it was a load, some spam bot managed to sit on your site and post a load of stuff. Or maybe even internally, like the developer was doing some testing on a particular thing that we don't normally use that often. And so as a result, I've got a load of test.com account stuff in there. So when that happens, that's hard. Equally, attribution is really tough. Knowing, okay, did the customer come because they heard this podcast or because they saw me speak at an event or because they then got referral, or maybe a combination of those things, and which will happen first and so on. Like that's always hard to pull apart. So we do as much as we can and try and focus on where it matters. I think an example of like the test data is a good example where we look at the leads data and we look at the anomalies. We go, oh, that's strange. We suddenly had a big uptick. Let's dive in. Let's understand that. Oh, it's a load of spam. Okay, let's get that deleted and fix it so that never happens again. Or maybe, we've seen a reduction. Is this a trend? Is this a one-off, or what's happening here? And doing the dive to then go, oh no, it's because some automation has fallen over somewhere else, and as a result, data's not being, some specific channel is not being captured, or maybe someone's accidentally turned off your Google AdWords, ad campaign, and as a result, that's why. So using those exceptions or using the spotting those sorts of things, we then go and sort out the workaround and fix the underlying problem. Sometimes, there's a genuine trend issue and you can deal with it. But I think that's the key is, even though the data is sometimes unclean, annoying, gets broken or whatever, that's not a good reason for then going, so let's not collect it, because that is the game. It's continually trying to improve it over time, digging into the variations and accepting that, I don't know, maybe 75% of the time it's nothing. It's, it's a blip on the radar that's, just a reflection of a bit of coral reef. But then every so often it's a mine and you need to take some countermeasures, or otherwise it's going to blow up the business. So, I think that's kind of how I look at it.
I mean, what is so immediately evident, or maybe cumulatively evident, and both having talked to you before, but also talking to you now, is that, perhaps it's unfair to characterize marketing data these days as one of our previous guests, Mark Evans, who was the chief marketing officer of Direct Line Group for more than 10 years. He referred to that caricatured version of marketing being the colouring in department. I think it's not quite the colouring in department that it was. But what is obvious is that you're looking at this. So you're looking at data. You're looking at the right data with the right frequency, such that you can notice things that might be trends or might be anomalies, or might be a sudden new pipeline opening up that you hadn't realised. Suddenly, the finance and procurement teams of mining companies want to work with you, and because you've spoken to God. No, I think that deciding what matters and then actually paying attention to it is where so many individuals, teams, organizations fall down. They can have brilliant intentions, or they can invest in a tremendously expensive and whizzy dashboard, but then they forget their login details and they can't do it. It seems like your checklist approach, as I say, deceptively simple, but obviously incredibly effective.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And what I'm going to say next is probably slightly odd, but I don't want to do it. Like, I think that's a misconception that I think people have because of, the kinds of things I talk about and the nature of the businesses I've created. I think people assume that my personality type and so on means that, oh yes, Alexis must be very data orientated, incredibly, clear on, very structured and with his processes, very diligent, very compliant, very following up. And no, none of that. Like, I'm a nightmare in many ways, because I rarely want to do anything more than once. And so as a result in my career, I've largely become a jack of all trades, because I just love trying new things and experimenting, and then I get bored with it and I move on, which is probably quite common for a lot of entrepreneurs, but becomes a bit of a problem because there are roles like follow up after sales, or reviewing the data in your business, or doing your accounts, which are really helpful to do on a regular basis and be on time and well in advance, and cause you significant stress when it's not done in that way. But that's me. I've had to come to terms with that's what I'm like. And so, I think you're right that the value or the power that I'm getting from data is regularly reviewing the right things. And yet it's one of the things that I don't look forward to. I wouldn't do it organically. The only reason it happens is because it's in my diary, and there is a checklist that I know we have to tick off as we go through it, and that there are other people there at the time. I find that if there's a fortnight where the rest of the exec team aren't around, there is significant risk to me freestyling it on that call, or not turning up, or whatever. And so for some areas where I've really struggled, particularly for keeping on top of sales pipelines, is something that I've struggled with in the past for the similar reasons, I've resorted to hiring a virtual assistant who literally sits on a call with me and walks me through the agenda, asking me questions, and me doing the thing. They're not, I've had times in my career where they're not even doing the thing. They're not doing the follow-up or whatever. The value that they add is literally shining a spotlight at me and going, have you followed up with all the clients you're meant to follow up on? And I go, oh, no, actually, okay, let me do that now. Or let me check my email to see whether I've had any follow-up, like response to that follow-up that I did last week. Oh, I did. They replied the following day and I haven't properly looked. right? So I think that's the crazy thing, is that in many ways, personality-wise, I'm terrible at this. But to some extent, that's why I've had to make it so easy in my business for this to work, and why I think it should be reassuring for other business leaders that we work with, because frankly, if I can do it, then anyone can, because, I don't know whether some of this perhaps is just undiagnosed, like ADHD and so on, but like, yeah, I am not good at keeping on the data on a regular basis. There are people in my organization, there are people in my life, like my wonderful wife, who are fantastic at it. But I am not naturally attuned to it.
Great. No, I love that. I love that kind of developed out of necessity, because if you didn't do it, then things would all fall over. And that's great. Now, talking of new things, what do you think about AI? Do you feel excited, threatened, nervous about ChatGPT and Bard and all the many other Midjourneys and all the other tools there are? What's your view about how AI can help you in what you do, and also in the service that you offer to your clients?
Yeah. So, am I excited, nervous, terrified? Yes. Yeah. All of those. And I think the more research that I've done into it, and I'm a bit of a geek, so back in, I think it was probably October, November, that I started really diving in. I've always been vaguely interested, but with ChatGPT launching in November last year, and the kind of preamble to that, that's where it was the first time that I went, ooh, I think this is now business ready. And it took probably 3 months of research before I was able to come to that conclusion with my business partner, having tested it, to go, yes, this is actually business ready now. There are lots of examples where it wasn't and now is, and there's still lots of examples where it isn't. But there are loads of ways in which businesses can leverage AI to create significant additional value for their clients with either the same or lower costs than they currently do. There's also significant risk to businesses being disrupted, both by other companies using AI, by AI new startups that generate the same result for the clients, but utilizing AI, but also change to their marketing and distribution models, because the way in which that we even that clients find us and so on is going to change. So I think it's a fascinating area, and in fact, it was something that our clients were asking us about, and so we literally created a guide on it, which you've got a fantastic. You've got your copy, and so we literally created that because I think that, as I experienced, it is so easy to spend a lot of time researching it and lose an afternoon or a day or a week and kind of go, oh, nothing's changed. Like I haven't now got use of it. And I think, unfortunately, I'm seeing lots of examples of people, or people advertising like, oh yeah, I saw one this morning, get 10,000 ChatGPT prompts, tested for your business, $59. And I think the problem is that as people go towards the shortcuts, like that's the wrong end of the spectrum too. Like spending the 100 hours and not getting a result is clearly bad, but thinking that you can spend $59 and get, something that will then immediately add value is also folly. And so that was why we wrote the guide, was essentially to say, how do you implement this in a practical way? How do you make sure that that AI isn't something that just a business leader gets their head around and can use day to day? And we have examples of that. People who have read the book and then said to me, "Oh, immediately I saved 4 hours the following day as a result of applying some things I learned." But for me, what's more exciting is when you get your team using it, because actually, as a leader, it's great if you can free up some more of your time. Fantastic. But if the business needs your knowledge of the AI, then the business is becoming dependent on you again to get that kind of level of efficiency. What you really want is your team embedding AI in their business processes to solve problems that previously couldn't be solved, to provide value to clients that previously couldn't be provided or was too expensive to provide. Oh, hang on, excuse me. Thank you, Tiffany. to provide value that previously you couldn't provide cost effectively, or to be more efficient in your business by making it so that, for example, we've had examples where activities that marketeers in a business previously would have taken 5 days to do take 2.5 to 3 days. And so suddenly their ability to produce just massively accelerates. We've also had clients, and there's one particular example that's in the guide, where we talk about Anna Moran with her podcast, where she previously was stuck having to edit the podcast herself because the way in which she was doing it made it cost prohibitive for her to be able to outsource that. And so she was trapped in the business. And what we did was we showed her how, by documenting the process as a simple checklist, firstly, it could now go to a VA rather than an expensive podcast editor. So instantly you've reduced the cost of doing it by 10x. And then we looked at to where are there specific steps that actually that take a lot of time, but could be done using AI. And so there's one particular one where it's like removing ums and ers and doing edits in the episodes, which she was taking a few hours doing, and instead a tool like Descript could do in 2 clicks. And so suddenly you've got a process that previously would have cost her thousands of pounds to outsource each time it was done, to instead being tens of pounds. And so it just fundamentally changed the whole possibility of what she can do day to day. So so I find it incredibly exciting for that reason. It's also terrifying because AI represents a genuine risk to society as we know it. And so having some understanding of that is important, and lobbying governments and so on to make sure they're doing everything they possibly can to reduce the risk there. But frankly, for most of us, and particularly business leaders, the most important thing we can do is work out how to leverage these tools for the good of society, to solve the biggest problems that we have. It's likely that AI could help us solve climate change, as long as it doesn't kill us first.
Very good. Very balanced reactions. Very good to hear also that you're both applying it and I'm inspired by that example that you give of the podcast producer. Obviously, we'll include a link to your using AI and ChatGPT in the show notes. Just a couple more questions as we draw towards a close. You appear to have got this very right in terms of getting into the Goldilocks zone of using data in the right way to run a business, not too much, not too little, just the right amount. Do you have any guidance to our listeners, our viewers, about how they might go about getting into that Goldilocks zone themselves?
I think it's probably a little bit linking back to our first core value, which is focus on impact. It's starting with what actually matters, what's going to make the difference. Because I think I remember back before at a particular point in my career as a management consultant, and I remember back then there being a lot of talk, particularly in big companies, about big data, and that was going to be the next big thing, was big data. And I still feel like that is a carrot that most organizations are still waiting for. Is, hang on, I thought we were going to get all this incredible intelligence about, by using data that was available in the organization already. And so, of course, to some extent, that's true. And there's examples of it. But I think often the mistake is starting with the data, like starting with what data do we collect, and then going, okay, now what? I think that quickly becomes overwhelming. I'm sure that there are examples of people in large organizations that are specialists and working more, junior in the organization. But for most leaders, that way madness lies. They're much better off starting off with what actually matters in this business. What are the key levers that are going to make the biggest difference? What are the trends that I can already see? And as a result, make sure that we're doing more of the things that work and less of the things that don't, to get the results. So I'd say that's probably how we've done that, because to some extent, when you start that way round, you just get to a point where it's almost like you run out of steam or run out of time to do more analysis. So perhaps that's how you end up in the Goldilocks zone. Like you avoid gilding the lily because you've got enough. And to be clear, I wouldn't say that we're perfect or possibly even in the Goldilocks zone. It's hard to know. I think what probably helps guide me is when we are doing the analysis, when we are reviewing the data, I feel I'm able to come to a conclusion and go, okay, the picture that I'm getting of the business is this, and describe it and agree it amongst the team. And everyone goes, yeah. So for example, yeah, I think we agree. Conversions are good. Customers are happy. Our biggest issue at the moment is lack of leads, say. And the reason for that is this, because these channels are working, but this one isn't. Do we agree? Okay, great. We've now defined the problem. Everything from there is now problem solving and so on. I think as long as I feel like I have that visibility, it's good. But there's always more that you can get, right? Like particularly to then get the deep dive and understanding. It's but it's never perfect. It's got to be enough.
Talking of lack of perfection, do you have an example of a misuse of data, either in your career or in the public domain? A really bad example of the way that data has been misused?
Well, I guess there's two sides to misuse. So I remember back in my management consulting days, where I worked for PA Consulting, and famously they were one of the big examples in the UK of where there was a sort of data, there was a USB stick that got lost, and so the consultants involved in PA Consulting, quite rightly, raised it with the Information Commissioner's Office and all that kind of stuff. And it made the headlines because it included some government data and so on. Now, the reality, I believe, is that it's not like it was stolen. It was a USB stick that a consultant was using, and I think it ended up in the wrong drawer at a hot desk or whatever, right? It wasn't lost in the sense of breach, like really, but not having it, unfortunately, is the same for them. And so what was really interesting is seeing a business like that. I was very impressed at how seriously that was taken and how it changed everything about how that business worked with data. Ideally, of course, you'd either have a near miss or wouldn't need the mistake to learn the lesson. But it meant that, they had asset stickers on notebooks because, to track even notebooks, USB sticks became, you couldn't use them unless they were encrypted USB sticks, and those had been issued. USB sticks were your last resort and shouldn't contain the level of security awareness massively increased that organization. This is way pre-GDPR has kind of brought about a similar thing, I think, more widely for businesses. And so that was a great example where misuse or mistaken use led to the business completely changing. And I share that example knowing that it's not really the misuse that we're talking about. Like misuse that we're talking about is often in relevance to your question is using the data to tell you a story that isn't the reality. And I've definitely seen loads of examples of that. Marketers and salespeople are sometimes guilty of that. Sometimes maliciously, or at least naughtily, using it in purposefully misleading ways, but often through incompetence. I think it's one of the areas that you often see on websites where they're like, oh yeah, we had a 2,000% increase. Actually that's not a 2,000% increase, that's a 200% increase. And, all those sorts of things that they just kind of get wrong. And so there's an example of that. But the reason I use that example of data loss is because it reminds me of how when you make a mistake, when you use data in the wrong way, when you come to the wrong conclusion, I think the temptation is often to go, okay. Oh, well, we just got that wrong. What's the new reality? And I think that happens a lot with data analysis. Like you'll look at the data, come to a conclusion, perhaps even start working in a particular direction, and then later find that actually the data wasn't telling you that. Maybe there was a load of test data, spam data. The decimal point was in the wrong place because of a formula. And the temptation is just to be like, well, okay, does it change the story enough? Oh, okay, yeah, the story's changed. Okay, let's do a thing. But actually, you need to change your processes. You need to look at what's our ways of working that means that happened, and how do we fundamentally design that out of the business? How do we make it so that as a business, we're making better decisions and we're always improving? And when we have near misses and mistakes, whether it's losing the data or just misunderstanding it, that doesn't happen again, and building that into your processes so that never happens. So those are the kind of examples that I've seen. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I'm trying to think of very specific examples. I certainly remember an example where we were looking at data on essentially a sort of leading indicator around our marketing, which is sort of a combination of a particular part of essentially traffic, if you like, and looking at that over an extended period of time and concluding that despite various activities, we hadn't really been able to move the needle and improve things. And I remember a particular example of them going, like, really? Is that the case? Like, that's frustrating, sure. But is that the case? And digging in and realizing that someone had added a row to a spreadsheet somewhere and the reference had been updated differently. And as a result, we were under the misapprehension nothing had changed. So instead, it had actually improved significantly. And and we could have taken our foot off the gas. But then, maybe we wouldn't have got the amazing results if we hadn't seen it quite like that. But yeah, it's that was frustrating, but at least it's the right way around. But I'm sure I've had examples where it's the other way around, where we assume everything's fine. It turns out to not to be. And it's hard. It's hard. I haven't got a good answer for how to make sure that never happens.
Great examples. Anything I haven't asked you about you and your data life that I should have done?
Not that I can think of. I think I suppose things that something that is probably useful for me to share is around when it comes to people's processes. I think that that's often something that people miss, is the opportunity to improve the data you have and the quality of the data you have by embedding it into the ways in which your staff work. So I ran a workshop earlier today in which one of the attendees was saying that they really struggle with getting visibility of what sales prospects have or haven't been followed up, and being able to see that in their CRM and report on it and get a sense of, are they doing a good job of follow-up, not doing a good job, or what's conversion rate, and so on. And for me, the answer is simple. It's like, well, in the sales process, in our case, like the checklist that my team literally followed to do a discovery call, there should be a step, which is at the end, after the call, update the CRM with this information, and then problem solved. And in fact, we in AirManual, you can set up automation so that when you complete this checklist, it fires that data into in our case, HubSpot or whatever CRM we've got through Zapier, and posts a message into the Slack channel to let the team know that I've had this call and here's what went well and here's what I think is going to happen next step, and sends a customer satisfaction survey. And that'd be another example, right? You might think, it'd be really useful. Like, how do I know if my team are doing a good job of calls with customers? And the answer for me is very, very simple, because at the end of every call, when they can click complete checklist, it fires off a customer satisfaction survey that a pretty large percentage of my customers answer, and that gets automatically posted into Slack so I can see it and then reported on as part of my dashboard. And that's all just because it's embedded in our processes so that we get that visibility. And I think that's key, because I think often I hear people say things like, oh, well, you can't really put a metric on how happy your customers are or how happy your employees are or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you can ask them.
Excellent. Finally, Alexis, where can our listeners and viewers find out about you and your business, what you're up to online in social media and so forth?
Yeah, so I'd absolutely encourage people to connect with me on social media, particularly on LinkedIn, but I'm on most of them. They can get the Business Leader's Guide to Using AI and ChatGPT at airmanual.link/AI/ebook. They can check out our podcast at destressyourbusiness.com. They can find out more about AirManual and read our guide and arrange a call if they go to airmanual.link/discover. But otherwise, if people have got questions, shoot me a message on social media or email me and the team at alexis.kingsbury@airmanual.co. Happily take any questions. But yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure, Sam. I really, really appreciate being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for your time, Alexis, for sharing your approach to using data smarter. I think if there were more people using data and evidence to drive business efficiency and performance in the way that you do, there would be rather less malarkey in the world of business growth and rather more data common sense. Alexis Kingsbury, AirManual, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.